Chapter 20, The SP. Not daring to look back, Nancy raced for the shelter of the woods, wondering if she could make it before being detected. Suddenly, she heard a hoarse shout. "Look, Chief! There goes a girl!" The young sleuth's heart sank. "Catch her!" Thorne yelled. "No, you fool!" barked Belle. "We haven't time! Into the plane, everybody! Go ahead, Adolf." "Wait!" came the tall man's hard voice. "I smell gasoline." Thorne gave an angry exclamation, and Belle said, "I do too. Where's it coming from?" "There's probably a leak in one of the fuel tanks," said Luther. Quickly, he ducked under the wing. "One drain valve is open," he shouted. "Open!" thundered Belle. "Who did that?" At once, Thorne climbed into the plane. In a moment, he gave an angry yell. "We have no fuel!" he cried, and jumped out. "The gauges read empty!" Miss Tyson raced up to them with 3 men and a girl at her heels, followed by the gatekeeper and his barking dog. "Everything's gone wrong!" she exclaimed. At that moment, a plane swooped soundlessly out of the sky. Before it taxied to a full stop, several armed state police officers jumped out and surrounded the criminals. A powerful searchlight was turned on the confused gang. A voice over a loudspeaker ordered, "Stand where you are! No one move!" "Ned!" Nancy cried out. She raced from the woods and reached the plane as he leaped from it, followed by Dave, her father, and the pilot. "Dad!" Nancy exclaimed, as Carson Drew caught her up in his arms. "Are you hurt?" he asked quickly. "No, Dad, but I'm so glad to see you. Ned, you're just wonderful." "Oh, Nancy, you take such chances," he said, "but I was sure happy I could come to the rescue." In a moment, a second noiseless plane skimmed down onto the field. Out jumped Bert, Lieutenant Mulligan, and 2 members of his detective squad. They joined the others in the circle of light, where the officers began snapping handcuffs on the prisoners. "Miss Drew," Lieutenant Mulligan said, "Ned Nickerson informed me of your plan, and I called the state police." "I'm glad the mystery is solved, Lieutenant," said Nancy, then turned to Thorne. "Where are the old ladies?" she asked anxiously. The gang members had been staring at Nancy in disbelief. "You!" Thorne sputtered. "How did you get out of the cistern?" "First answer my question," said Nancy. "They're in the cellar," Belle replied shortly. Miss Tyson spoke up. "They are not in the cellar." As Belle looked at her, puzzled, she added, "I didn't have time to put them there. As soon as I saw the air was out of our car tires, I knew something had gone wrong with the plans. I wanted to get away, fast." "What did you do with Morgan?" Nancy asked quickly. "Nothing. He's still in the car." Nancy explained Morgan's condition to the police, who promised that the houseman would be taken to a hospital. Thorne glared at Nancy. "How did you get out of the cistern?" "Climbed out," Nancy said directly. "I used the ladder you gave me." Miss Tyson gasped. "That's impossible!" Briefly, Nancy told how she had escaped and sent for help. "SP at once," Ned said with a grin. "Sailplane at once." "Also send police," Nancy added. "These aren't gliders?" Tucker asked. "No," Ned answered. "They're motorized sailplanes. They were perfect for this job because we flew them here using the motor, then cut it out and landed soundlessly." He grinned at Dave. "All we had to do was find 2 sailplanes. We finally rented these from an airport in the next county. The state police provided the pilots." "Dad," said Nancy, "how did you hear about the plan?" "Ned briefed me. He called our house on the chance that I'd returned from Chicago." Looking at Adam Thorne, Mr. Drew added, "I'm proud of my daughter, Thorne. She planned to take you and your accomplices by surprise, so you couldn't harm the old ladies before you bolted." Lieutenant Mulligan cleared his throat. "Miss Drew, you're a fine detective." Nancy smiled and thanked him. Adolph Tooker turned to Belle and said angrily, "This is the girl you said would be no trouble?" "I warned Belle about her," Thorne spoke up, "but he wouldn't listen." "It's not my fault," said Belle, his voice rising nervously. "It's Thorne's. Ever since he read about the Cornings' jeweled crystal collection, he wanted to steal it. Then he dragged us into the scheme and bungled it. My men were doing all his work. Whenever I wanted Tar and Jackson, they were trailing Nancy Drew in the sedan or spying on that Sylvan Lake place. They even set the dog on her. Twice they snatched Morgan, and Jackson showed the blue fire night after night to scare him. It finally worked. Then suddenly Morgan wouldn't go along with us, so we had to teach him a lesson. As for Tar," Belle went on bitterly, "he spent days making the firework wheel and rigging up an asbestos-lined box for it." Tar gave a sickly grin. "All I had to do was shut the door of the box and the blue fire was gone, like magic." Jackson's face was paled. "We only did what Thorne ordered." "Be quiet, all of you," barked Thorne. "Don't you know there are police listening?" "It doesn't matter," Adolph Tooker said wearily. "They'll find all the evidence they need here." "Is this your whole gang?" Mulligan asked sharply. Tooker looked around the group, which included the gateman with the dog, the pigeon keeper, and the nurse's aide whom Nancy had startled in the hall. "Yes." Miss Tyson's assistant was shaking with fright. "I was only doing what Dr. Bell ordered. He told me the patients were too nervous to have visitors." "He's no doctor," Nancy told her, "and I find it hard to believe Miss Tyson is a real nurse." The hard-faced woman shot her a venomous look. "The police will find out about them all," Lieutenant Mulligan said grimly. At that moment, 2 helicopters appeared, lights flashing. They landed on the field and the rotors were silenced. "Last stage of Nancy's plan," Ned said. "Reinforcements." "Okay," called a state police officer to the arriving troopers. "Load this gang in the copters and take them away." An hour later, Nancy had the biggest thrill of the evening. As she walked into the Cornings' living room with her father and the boys, she saw Mrs. Eldridge seated in a big chair with little Marie asleep on her lap. At one side stood the child's mother, on the other a tall stranger. "Nancy," the old woman said happily, "this is my nephew John. Nancy Drew is the girl who—" Tears filled her eyes, and she could not go on. "Yes," he said, "Nancy Drew has done a wonderful job. Thank you, Nancy." "The hospital called," said Mrs. Corning. "Morgan will be all right. We're so grateful to you for clearing up the mystery about him." "Will you take him back?" Bess asked. "Of course. He is honest and faithful. We know his true story. There can't be any more trouble." Nancy thanked her friends for helping her. She gave Bess and George each a squeeze and quickly excused herself to change her clothes. When she came downstairs, Mrs. Corning had a tray of tempting food waiting. "Oh, good," said Nancy. "Supper was a long time ago. I'm famished." While everyone ate, Mrs. Eldridge told what she had learned while a prisoner at Larkspur Lane. Tooker, whose real name was Van Hofwitz, was an international confidence man. "The sanatorium was his idea," she said. "He made Bell a partner, and he was to pass as doctor. Thorne had put money into the venture while in prison. As soon as he escaped, he joined the others." Mrs. Eldridge went on to say that von Hofwitz ingratiated himself into various social circles. He would introduce the fake doctor to wealthy ladies who complained of old age. I see now how silly I was, Mrs. Eldridge said. I was taken in by their suave manners and my own vanity. She revealed that the unscrupulous pair would persuade the women to go secretly to the sanatorium. There, using drugs and threats, Bell prevailed upon the patients to sign away large parts of their wealth to him. Mr. Drew spoke up. Thorne is a very sharp lawyer, and no doubt the contracts he drew for you women to sign seemed harmless enough, but could not be changed, even if your relatives tried to break them. But your courage, Mrs. Eldridge, said Nancy, helped to put an end to the whole scheme. There are 2 questions I hope you can answer, she added. Why did the gang use blue bells in the code? Because Bell was so conceited, he wanted his own name in it. Blue, of course, was the color of the flowers growing so profusely around the estate. And why was the pigeon released from the plane? Tooker was flying from the mansion to an appointment with an old woman in Pennsylvania that day. He let the bird go on the way so that it would reach his estate more quickly. Thank you, Mrs. Eldridge, for the answers to my questions, Nancy said. And now I'll go upstairs and get your bracelet for you. No, dear, said the old lady. I want you to keep it as a memento. How wonderful! Nancy hugged her. Mr. Corning spoke up. And I am going to order French crystal earrings in the form of tiny larkspurs for you and the other girls. Oh, how exciting! Bess exclaimed. Thank you very much. George grinned and added her thanks. Nancy protested that she wanted no reward. I'm just happy everything turned out right. Ned grinned. If I were to give Nancy the reward she'd like best, I'd hand her another mystery to solve. But it was not Ned who would bring the clue of the broken locket to Nancy, though he was to play a part in the strange case. I'll find you a mystery by tomorrow morning, he promised jokingly. And I'll be ready for it, Nancy said with a twinkle in her eyes. But make it very, very complicated and original. The end.